All right, thanks for joining us for another Spin That Shit podcast. Today's guest is a big one. When you start talking to people that have titles such as, Grammy winner, Grammy nominee, Emmy, Smithsonian, Grand Ole Opry, start talking to people that are associated with that. That's quite the resume. So we're very excited and happy to have Dom Flemons with us on the show. We picked his brain about a bunch of different stuff and just kind of shoot the shit and talk about records, all kinds of stuff. So it was a good time. Nice guy. Check him out. He's all over online, social media, and all that good stuff too. One thing I do want to say, I appreciate the follows, the likes, the shares, all that good stuff. We're slowly climbing. So just keep that up. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, of course, if you're watching. If not, we're on all streaming platforms. And there is a donation link. If you'd like to throw us a couple bones, keep the show rolling, that'd be great. We have no sponsors. I just do this for fun, something we started with COVID. I'm on Instagram a lot. Get on there and holler at me. Let's go talk to Dom. Can you hear us?
Yeah. How's it going, guys?
There we go.
How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. Just hanging, that's all.
Yep.
Yeah, man, we really appreciate you being on. Got a busy lifestyle, I'm sure. Last night you were at the Opry stage, huh?
That's correct. Yeah, it was a great time over there. Yeah, I was over there, and then I was doing some recording over here in town.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're in DC area, right?
Well, I was, but now I'm over in the Chicago area as of last fall.
Oh, nice. Okay. You're all over the place, man.
Oh yeah, I keep on the move pretty well,
Yeah. Well, the show, we're pretty laid back. We just talk music because we love it. So that's what we're going to do.
Awesome.
But first, can you give us a little background and where you came from and your influences and how you kind of got into all this?
Oh, sure thing. Yeah, well, I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona, and I started to play the guitar and the harmonica when I was, I guess, halfway through high school, about junior in high school, and I started getting into old-time rock and roll and doo-wop and folk songs, and that was my beginnings, and I did that for a long time, learned to busk on the streets and everything, and I went all the way through college doing that. And once I finished out college, I happened to go to an event called the Black Banjo Gathering in 2005. And that's when I started my journey outside of my hometown. And I went to North Carolina and studied and learned from a lot of different musicians there for, I don't know, better part of 10 years. And somewhere in there, I was living in New York City for a little bit. So I was in Manhattan for a while, in Brooklyn, just trying to take down the sounds of the modern folk revival. And so that was where I was going from there. And then I came back to North Carolina for a bit. And then I lived in DC for a while and started working at the Smithsonian for a bit. And now I'm over in Chicago.
You said
in a nutshell.
Quite the journey.
All the way around. You picked up the guitar and the harmonica in junior year. So was there a person in your life or a specific group that made you think, oh, I got to try this?
Well, I saw a documentary on TV on the history of rock and roll, and that really just turned me on to older music in general. And so from there, I was thankful I had a great public library, because what I would do is that I basically, at first when I'd see a documentary or something like that, I would go deep into the stacks and I would start to find albums, and I started to sort of build a vocabulary from there. And as I went along, I started seeing that there were pathways in which all of these different songs and all these different artists were connected in one form or the other. Sometimes it was by location, sometimes it was by the types of music they played. And then also I found that there were a lot of different styles that defined each of these artists. And so I just started to listen to music a bit more critically. I guess after about 5 or 6 years of performing and playing at the coffee houses locally, I started to try to find different ways to approach kind of a multifaceted aspect of acoustic music. Because at that time, before the internet was a big part of everybody's lives, when you got into country music or blues or jazz or whatnot, you would usually stay on that singular track. And so I found that there were stories and artists that sort of fit in between those different spaces. But I guess I was about 18 when I got to see the folk singer Dave Van Ronk. I got to see him at a coffee house, and his style of playing songs and telling stories, that was something that really moved me. And so from there, I started to do that in my own shows, giving context about the artists that I had originally heard, or if I learned a song from a person, keeping a story about my learning and putting it out there for the audience. Because I found a lot of times most audience just weren't familiar with the music that I was playing. And so while a lot of my friends, they might have chagrined at a 78 recording, they found interest when they heard the song played by me. And there was a lot of power in live performance compared to just hearing it on record. And so I found that there was a need there.
Yeah. I'll say that I've seen you twice for sure live, maybe three. One was a big show. A lot of people. You were opening for Old Crow Medicine Show years ago, and then the other one was a smaller venue at the Hi-Fi before they rebuilt it. Oh, yeah. That was cool because I stood over there and I actually talked to your wife. I've met you before, but you've probably don't remember you meet so many people. But that live performance and intimate show, I like how you would break down each song beforehand and kind of give that background so you can connect with it easier.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There was kind of twofold. It's been it's sort of to teach context, but also it gives me room to be able to figure out what I might do next, because I try to feel the audience out to see where they want to go, if they want to go into more of a traditional route or if they're wanting to go into something that's a little bit different. And it gives me some time to be able to weave together a story for the audience based on who they might be or what they're into. Some audiences just want to sit there and hear the songs without really reacting. But there are other times when people want to dance. There are other times when people are wanting to lean into the stories a little bit more. And, so it kind of gives a nice ebb and flow.
Right. Yeah. I feel like I've experienced both of that. The more laid back than I've seen. I remember seeing you perform too with Carolina Chocolate Drops as well, the Vogue and Indy. And that was more of a dancing show. We were all dancing.
Oh, absolutely.
Now you play, what instrument do you not play is probably the better question.
Well, fiddle is the easy answer. That was the one thing I never really was able to master, was playing the fiddle and the violin. There's just there's no instant gratification in the fiddle, and so I found that each time I tried to learn it, it always got the best of me, and so I just started to leave it behind, and I started to just adapt fiddle tunes onto the harmonica, and that was something that I found to be a little more to my taste.
Yeah.
You mentioned kind of your travels across the country and picking up probably musical and life lessons from other players. So what's maybe the one or two best pieces of advice you either got for working in this industry or life on the road or anything like that?
Well, I guess if I were to think of two different types of advice, one would be a piece of advice I got from my good friend Mike Seeger before he passed away. His was more of a business piece of advice. He mentioned that when you're on the road, you're naturally going to run into ups and downs, especially when you've been hard at it on the road, and then in the moments when you're off the road after having been on the road. So there will be big ups and downs. And if there's anything you can do to get those ups and downs to be less drastic, that'll really help you in the long run. And I found that was a great piece of advice that he gave me about being in the business, because that's something that a lot of artists deal with, is when you're on that high from doing all the traveling and doing all the shows, what do you do when you get home? And there are many stories of artists who have figured out positive and negative ways to handle that space. And so he gave me some great advice there. Another one comes from Taj Mahal, another good friend of mine. And one of the things that Taj told me years ago, especially when it came to researching music, he told me, he said, uh, you can dig into this music and you can dig and dig and dig for the next 100 years and find that you've only barely broken the surface. And that's something I found, especially with a lot of these old time numbers. No matter how much you might learn about it, there's always more to be learned, or there's a new story to be told. And that's something that if you keep an open mind with that, then you can find some amazing music, and you can find some wonderful stories and experiences through that music, especially if you just keep your mind open to it. Because if you think that there's an end to it, then you'll find the end to your journey sooner than later. But if you keep it wide open, then the possibilities are truly endless.
I love that. That's good.
That is good. Taj Mahal, definitely. That's a good piece of advice right there. And then now it's got me thinking. It's like I go down the rabbit hole on several artists, way, and then I just kind of stop. But you could dig even further, elaborate on that more, find some probably really good stuff that I'd be into.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, that was one of the things that drew me in, especially when I started collecting records. It was before there was a big resurgence. And at the time, you could find vinyl records for quite cheap in Arizona. And, you could find any number of albums for $2 or $3. And I found that I had so many situations where I was able to get artists' full catalogs. And so, I don't own all of these particular records all the time anymore, but I used to have big catalogs of I don't know, everything from used to have every Joan Baez record. I went to this store one time and they had this big chunk of records. It was just 30 records that were a quarter a piece. And
Wow.
Man.
And so I was able to take in 30-40 years of musical information in a short period of time with some artists, just because somebody would want to sell their vinyl collection off to a store, and I happened to be there at a time when the records were quite inexpensive, because of course I never had a lot of money. And I do okay now, but back then I really didn't have any money. And and so just to be able to spend a quarter, if you have $2 in your pocket and you can get 8 records out of that, why not dig in as far as you can, especially if you see that you're on a wave to pick more albums up, and to be able to learn more about the artists that in many cases I was already into, or I had heard a song by them, or I had heard that I should check them out, and then just be able to see them on a big from a bird's eye view, which is something that they themselves might not have had a chance to do in their own time. So it was, that's something that I always think about. And of course, there are a lot of great vinyl records that are coming out every day now, which whether it's new stuff or whether it's old stuff or even unreleased stuff that's finally seen the light of day. So it's been wonderful to take that in and to be able to get a chance to hear all those great sounds.
Yep. I'm one of the resurgence people. I probably had 20 records for like 5 years, and I just had a cheap player. And then during COVID, I went nuts. I've got like three receivers right now, 3 different turntables I've just been tinkering with. So that's a good hobby. If God forbid there was a fire or anything, are there 2 or 3 records you'd want to make sure you grab?
Well, you got to pregame your move once you get the vinyl record collection in place. As I mentioned, I've lived several places in the past 20 years, and every time I gotta set the vinyl up. I gotta pregame the move with just getting the vinyl into boxes and have it ready to move, so that when I get to wherever I'm going, that's taken care of. And then there's the rest of the stuff, and that's one of the things I've wondered about the vinyl resurgence. Once people realize that once you have more than 10 or 15 of these things, it becomes its own burden of stuff,
Yep.
How many do you have if you had to put a number on it?
I'd probably say I got about now I've probably got about 6,000 that are high quality, and that's over the years. You know, I had more at one point. Like I said, I'd buy big chunks of records, and I've whittled it down. So most all of the records are great in one form or another. They're either really nice pressings, or they're just albums that I just absolutely love. And so I don't have many clunkers in my collection. So over time, I've gotten about I'd probably say about 6,000 that altogether. It takes up a whole big shelf, you know. If you go to IT and get those 5x5 shelves, I'm just busting out of one of those right now. So that's
Yep. I know the problem. I've got a face, like somebody was selling like 700 records for $70, and maybe I kept 15 or 20 of them. The rest are in my garage, but it's fun. I mean, going through those, it's wild. Justin, you might have to come pick through them.
I'm coming over.
Anytime, man, you just come on by, you know. And but that's one of the beautiful things is that there's so many great qualities to a vinyl record. There's the cover, which sometimes you can find a record that, you know, inside means nothing, but the cover is worth everything. And then you can find the opposite sometimes, where there's a nondescript cover that seems like it wouldn't be anything, or it's an artist you've never heard of before. And all of a sudden you put that thing on and it changes your life, you know. And that's one of the big things I just love about listening to music, especially on a record, because a record, you have to sit there and listen to it. In the digital age, you know, Spotify, it makes you a little ADD when it comes to listening to music, because it's so easy to push the next track or to push the next song in some type of way. But a record, you really can't do that unless you decide to lift the needle up and move around. But who's going to do that? And also a record is more or less 15 to 20 minutes each side, so it also takes the edge off of an hour-long record per se. You know, like you can split it up into 15-minute chunks so that you can get halfway through, and then you can kind of set it to the side. Or especially when you listen to some of the classic records like from the 70s, where, you know, artists really figured out a way to find a methodology to the albums, whether it's let's say like like Moondance by Van Morrison, for example. The A side is all the hit songs, and then you flip it over and then you find songs that are a little more experimental, that aren't quite so pop oriented. And, you know, it's great to be able to just see the different ways that artists have handled things. You know, even when I'm doing my records, I think about the way that it sounds, it would sound on a vinyl record first. You know, it helps me with sequencing and thinking about what are the stories I'm trying to tell in any given amount of time. And of course, I try to think about it as an LP, and then I think of it as a playlist as well. So I try to figure out a way to make it the best of both worlds with the way the songs go together. So there's a whole a beautiful aesthetic that grows from record collecting. And then there's 78 collecting, which I have a few 78s, but I'm not as deep into it as other friends of mine I know.
No, since COVID, I'm on the same boat as you, Garrett. I've been buying vinyls everywhere, especially every show I've been to. I think I at least buy one, depending on the artist, if they have them available. It's definitely become an addiction. I'm sure I'll be battling for the rest of my life.
Well, that's a beautiful thing, you know, and getting the albums at shows, it's great. I mean, CDs are wonderful. They've always been convenient in terms of being able to hold them in your hand and put them in the car and things like that. But there's nothing like going to a show and getting an artist to sign their record when you're able to make it all happen. I mean, even for me as a performer on stage, if I know an act that I really like in general is going to be around, I'll bring a record so that they'll sign it, you know, or I'll pick it up at the merch table. I was just thinking about I just did a gig in Arkansas, and there was a group Chawa, which is a Mardi Gras Indian group, and I got the whole band to sign it. You know, I'm backstage, and they're usually happy to sign a record, but you know, I just get to have a record that's signed by the whole band, and then I get to put it in the collection next to some of the other records I've been able to get signed over time. You know, I got a nice little collection of those as well. From I got Odetta to sign one of my records one time, which was really great, and I think at Taj Mahal I've got about 3 records that he signed, or the Riders in the Sky. I got to do some shows with them, so I got them to sign their records. You know, and it's a beautiful thing. You know, it's like its own. It's a special memory that you get to take with you. You know.
I
Right.
got one more question while we're on this. Don't want to keep on this the whole time, but since you're a pro, what's your record storing methodology? So, okay, I got Steve Miller Band here. Do you put the vinyl back in the sleeve, in the inner sleeve, or do you do this deal?
Well, I have 2 different sets of them. If the store has already preset them with the vinyl out, then I just leave it as is. But I like to put them back into the sleeve if the sleeve isn't too damaged, just because I like to look at the back as well. That's the one thing with having the vinyl out, is that you can't get to the back that easily unless you take it out and open it and everything like that. But I try not to tamper with the record once I get it from the store. However it's presented, I leave it in that way, and that's partially because I also have my record list, and I tend to write down where I got all of my records. I'm hoping one day I might actually be able to do something with this information, but I like to keep track of where I was when I bought a record, because for some reason, unlike a CD, I can't remember where I bought any CDs, but I can remember exactly where I was when I got that vinyl record, and that's one of those things I just love to do for my own personal, I don't know, in the days when I'm gone, then people will know where I was when I picked up those records,
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Speaking of records, we have to talk about your records now.
Oh, okay. Uh-oh.
Well, I mean, I was really into Black Cowboys, and you won a Grammy for that, correct?
I got a nomination on that one.
Okay.
I was going to say sadly enough, but it's an honor to be nominated.
Absolutely, yeah.
Bunch Brothers were able to pull that one off that year, but I got the nomination on that one, and it was a real honor, just because putting that project together meant a lot to me personally.
Mm-hmm. That's one of those things where I was talking about just kind of I like history. So, and I've heard you explain it on other shows, and to me, I just thought that was big, especially right now in this climate. There's just an awesome concept that you just decided to come up with and run with. Can you tell us about that? Like, what made you want to just hammer that out and make it happen?
Well, it was a couple of different things that happened, kind of all in succession. Ultimately, it took me about close to 10 years to get Black Cowboys to its final form in the way that it was released. I guess it was around 2010. I came across a book called The Negro Cowboys that talked about 1 in 4 cowboys that settled the West being African American, and working alongside the Anglo Cowboys and the Mexican Vaqueros and the Native American Cowboys. And so that book was kind of the starting point, because being from Arizona, I was aware of the Black history of Arizona, just having grown up. I'm half Black and half Mexican, and so the minority community story of Arizona and of the Southwest is very unique. And so I was aware of the history on a personal level, but the story of Black Cowboys was something that was new to me, even though it wasn't completely unfamiliar. So going back to vinyl records, one of the great records I found in college, which I was able to pick up later, was an album called Back in the Saddle Again, which came out on New World Records. And it's a double LP explaining the history of cowboy music on commercial record. And so it featured both commercial recordings from people like Gene Autry, all the way through field recordings that were made for the Library of Congress. And it was made in the 80s, so it goes all to Chris Ledoux is kind of like the new guy on this record. And so I was really just blown away by the format of this double LP. And so when I decided I wanted to do an album on Black Cowboys, I used that as a template because I thought that would be a great way to be able to discuss and be able to record songs that would have a broad reach. And so as I was going along, I found a CD that had come out several years back called Black Texicans from the Deep River of Song collection, which featured field recordings of John and Alan Lomax. And so Alan Lomax's liner notes mentioned that the recordings on that particular CD are some of the few examples we have of the Black folk song tradition in the cowboy community. And so I was drawn to this story of one Negro Cowboys told a written book history, and then Black Texicans told an audio history of Black Cowboys. And so I was then left with this idea. I said, well, okay, the who, what, when, and where were all clear, but the why it would be relevant, that was the thing that ended up being the hardest part of putting the project together. So being a big fan of cowboy music, and my dad was a big country music fan as I was growing up. And I started to look at cowboy music in a general sense and tried to figure out what sort of ways could I reaffirm cowboy music in a general sense. And then how could I bring in African-American folk music and also some of the stories that I was finding? Because there are a few cowboy songs that have direct African-American, cowboy stories connected to them, like Goodbye Old Paint and Home on the Range. And I wanted to use those two as sort of the foundation to bring this idea of cowboy music into, so it's like bring the umbrella of cowboy music into the African-American cultural sphere, So there were also like the early songsters from Texas, people like Leadbelly and Lightning Hopkins and Mance Lipscomb and Henry Thomas. These were also musicians who were connected within the cowboy tradition, but they were blues singers. So anybody who loves their music has an understanding somewhat that they were connected to the cowboy tradition. But an album that really focused on that, I hadn't seen one. That it didn't really exist as far as I knew. And so I had these different ideas. I had the book history, I had the field recording history, then I had the songsters. And then there was the fourth part, which were larger than life characters of the West that were Black cowboys. People like Nat Love, who wrote his own autobiography, or Bass Reeves, who's the historical precedent for the Lone Ranger. And I started to bring these larger than life characters into the sort of the spectrum of the whole album. So I had about 50 songs I had put together originally that would touch upon all the different parts of the Black Cowboy story. But then, of course, I whittled it down to the 18 tracks that are actually on the album. And so I had this idea. And so I brought it to Smithsonian Folkways because I guess a couple years earlier, I had been a part of the opening ceremonies for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I had been a fan of their African American Legacy series for quite a while. And at that time, they had not had any contemporary artists on that series. And so I thought it would be a perfect a marriage of all of these different ideas to where then I could get it into the museum and I could help just, again, at the time, people weren't talking about Black cowboys like they are now. And that's been a beautiful thing for me as a scholar and a researcher to be able to put this singular project together and to see that it proliferated so far out into pop music and into movies and all of these things. And so I talked with Smithsonian Folkways and we were able to get it onto the series. And then the museum saw what I was doing and they also gave their support. And so that was sort of how the album came together. And then it took about a year and a half then to write the 40-page liner notes that are accompanying the album. It was quite a venture, and my wife Vania and we were able to really hone the narrative into something that I think it was that everybody could relate to in one form or another. Because of course you have an African American story of the past with the Cowboys, but when you start to really look into this history, you start to see that this cowboy of the past turns into a cowboy of the present, and is very much a part of the evolution of different townships and also different African American communities that you find throughout the West and in parts of the Midwest as well. Coming out from the South, of course, in the years after slavery, people had a lot of different ways they decided to take their life and their destiny into their own hands. And so I wanted to try to figure out ways to showcase that without being too overbearing, without being too didactic and talking, talking over people's heads, because there was always a chance that could have happened just because it's a lot of information. And so I started to piece this thing together, and I couldn't help but think of another record I loved, which is Gunfighter Ballads and Trail Songs from the great Marty Robbins, who's another Arizona native. And I wanted to try to find the sort of appeal that Marty Robbins had. I also have to mention Redheaded Stranger by Willie Nelson. So finding the appeal of those two albums and placing that into a context that would be historical, but also would be exciting. And so did that, and visually I was able to go into the Smithsonian's archives and find some beautiful photos from the past, as well as I got to work with my good friend Timothy Duffy over at Music Maker Foundation, who created these wonderful tintypes where I was able to recreate some of the old time Western imagery. And it was just a beautiful project to bring together. But once it was out, I was so relieved. But then I was just blown away. That when you do historical projects, there's no telling how long it will take for anybody to catch on to it. And I was just so glad to see that not only did people catch on, they saw what I saw, which is that there's a relevance that can grow from just understanding this history of the Black West. And so that was something that I was really glad, because I figured people in Houston who have familiar roots or who are still living there, or people that are in Atlanta or in Biloxi, Mississippi, where they have a very vibrant cowboy tradition that still is going on, that I was always hoping that they would catch on. I also hope that any Western museum would catch on, because I go to a lot of museums when I'm on the road, and I found that there was either one book or another book in every gift shop about the Black West. It was either Buffalo Soldiers, they might have a Western cowboy book, they might have a kid's book, they might have an adult book, or they might have William Loren Catt's Black Indians, which is about Native American and African American culture as it mixed in the West. And so I found that they just had one book of each of these in many of the museums. And so the album was also meant to be a way to kind of codify all those things into a single package, so that every Western museum could have something. And it's been a really beautiful thing to see how it's all evolved since.
Yeah. Incredible. It's important to get those stories out. I would feel an enormous amount of pressure going through all that information, all those songs, putting that together. But it's amazing. What do you think you would be doing if it wasn't music? Would you be involved in history in some way, you think?
Yeah, this is what I'd be doing every weekend if I was working a regular job. And that's what I was doing anyway. I mean, that's up until I went out to North Carolina in 2005. I was always involved in wanting to know more about the history and also learning more about the music and hearing new songs and melodies. My degree is in English, and I studied ancient literature. So the idea of literature and how it can tell a lot about culture was always something that was always of interest to me, and it was always a focus when I was when I was taking my academic research that I was doing in other different ways and applying it to what I felt in my heart. That was something I was doing all the time. So it's been a beautiful way to be able to take both of those passions and put them together in a way that it wasn't just me turning into a teacher. It allowed me to do something a little bit broader than I might have originally have thought when I first started it out,
Right.
But I've always tried to keep the fun in it, though. That's the other thing too, is like there's of course the history, and there's all the academic research, but the album has to be fun. The music has to be entertaining in some type of way. And that's what I also tried to do with Black Cowboys, was to make an entertaining album. I tried to make it almost like a little movie. And when you hear Black Cowboys all the way through, each individual song means something, and they all have stories. But when you hear it all together, it tells a beautiful little story of a lot of different people and their journey.
Yeah, that's Justin's favorite. I think my favorite is Buffalo Junction. It's just very Alan Lomax-esque, very authentic. It's like a front porch session. So what was that like? And working with Boo Hanks, what was that all about?
Well, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because Buffalo Junction is also one of my favorites as well. So I mentioned Timothy Duffy, who did the Tintypes. And so Music Maker Foundation is a nonprofit organization that helps out traditional Southern artists. And right before I first came to North Carolina, I came across several of Music Maker's albums at the public library. I actually found a copy of Honey Babe by Aljamain Hinton, and Bull Durham Blues by John D. Holman, Prison Blues by Neil Patman, and Down in the South by Guitar Gabriel. And so I loved these records, and I was amazed to see that there was traditional music that was contemporary that was being recorded. And that was something really neat, because again, if you get into the like I mentioned about Taj Mahal, who's been a board member and a creative consultant for Music Maker for many years, you keep delving into the story, and sometimes you run out of records, or you've heard all of the records that are the well-known records, especially when it comes to blues after a certain point. And so to be able to hear these unique artists and hear their unique voices, that was one thing for me. So fast forward a couple of years to when I first started the Carolina Chocolate Drops in 2006. I happened to meet Timothy Duffy at a festival that the group was playing at. And at that time, we had only recorded our first demo, which would become the album Dona Got a Ramblin' Mind. And so Tim and I got to talking, and I mentioned that I had heard his albums, and he was kind of blown away by that in general. And so we started a conversation, and that's how the Carolina Chocolate Drops made their very first records, was working with Timothy Duffy. So every time I was off the road with the Carolina Chocolate Drops, I was going to the Music Maker office, and I was providing support by being a backup musician, as well as being someone that would help out when there were field recording sessions, or helping out with advocacy for each of the artists. Or when they did a Music Maker review, I was an extra guitar player, a harmonica player, a bones player, whatever they needed me to be. And so there's a fellow out in Virginia by the name of Tony Young, who had been a big fan of Music Maker, and he got to know Boo because there was a blues band that knew Boo, and Tony got a chance to go over to Boo's trailer that he had at that time. He was in this old dilapidated trailer he had had since the mid '60s, and so Tony had cold called Music Maker and told them that he'd like to bring Boo down so that he can audition for them. And so with Music Maker, it's a partnership based organization. So there's a moment where the artist has to meet Music Maker, and then they have to figure out if they can actually work together or not, because sometimes it just doesn't work out for one reason or another. So Boo came down, and I was asked to come down to play second guitar, just not knowing what he was going to do. And actually track number 2 on Buffalo Junction, Keep On Truckin', that was the very first song that we played together. And the excitement that you hear on that recording is the excitement of us all playing together for the first time. So all of a sudden, Boo came down. He had, at that time, he was still sitting on a tractor, working on the farm where he was living. He was living in Buffalo Junction. He came in after a long day's work, and he sat down and played for 3.5 hours and cut that first record in one day.
Wow.
And I was just holding on for dear life with my jug and my bones and my guitar, hoping that I would get everything right as I was learning the songs as I was going. And so that was how it started. And Buffalo Junction ultimately is a compilation of a lot of different sessions we were able to do, because I then became Boo's main guy, backing him up. And being a fan of Brownie McGee and Sonny Terry, I then took on that role of Sonny Terry, playing harmonica next to Boo, or even Cephas and Wiggins. I do, however you want to count that style. I then became his harmonica guy and his backup guy. And then also, as I was touring, I made sure to help him out, take care of whatever he needed whenever we had a chance. And so, we got to tour around together for close to 10 years. And it was just beautiful to get to work with Boo, and also to help him see how powerful his music could be. And, he had a chance to play for a lot of different audiences. One of our last major gigs that we got to play was over at the Newport Folk Festival. And it was just beautiful to be able to take him to all these different places. And he was always so appreciative. And so, that album is a real special record because of that. And there's some just really wonderful songs, because even Tim at that time, we were blown away that he was playing stuff from Blind Lemon Jefferson. He was playing stuff from Blind Boy Fuller. He was playing stuff from Brownie McGee in his early years. And at that time, most of the music maker artists were playing mostly R&B numbers. They were playing like Louis Jordan or Ray Charles or Jimmy Reed. And that was more of the localized blues repertoire that was a part of many of the songsters that Tim had been working with. So to meet an artist that was playing such old material and that he had never recorded before in any type of way, that was something that was just a special treat for all of us. And so that was great. Then there's other stuff like, first time we met him, he talked about how in his family, the Hanks family, they claimed that they were kin to Mary Hanks, who was Abraham Lincoln's mother. And so Abraham Lincoln's mother, she did not know who her father was. And there's a story that he might have been a black man in the neighborhood and then got ousted from the neighborhood. But Boo claimed that he was part of that family line from this Hanks man that was Mary Hanks's father. So he got so deep when it came to cultural stuff as well. It really bridged this gap between the deep past that you can find in the South to the very present, because Boo was there, and he was so proud that he had a great grandson that he got to see grow before he passed away. And it was like,
wow.
It's like, how good, this is the reason I left Arizona to pursue music and decided to become professionals, because one, I could meet someone like Boo Hanks, and then two, as a younger person in the scene, I could also be someone who could help diversify the representation that we were seeing. Of course, these are conversations that are very much on a hot topic right now, but back in 2005, that was something that I saw was needed, was just diversifying the voices that are speaking, whatever they might be, if it's elder people or if it's younger people, or if it needed to be a broader ethnicity, like more Black voices or whoever it might be. And that was something that was a part of that. Now, well, I'm glad you asked me about Buffalo Junction, because that's I've been so glad it's gotten its own little revival on the streaming services, because it's something I had on the table for a long time, but when I ran out of copies of the CD, then that was kind of it for what it was. So I'm glad that it's getting a little revival now.
Yeah, it's great.
Thank you.
I gotta ask you some info on the bones, playing the bones. I the first time I met you, you may or may not remember this, but I was telling you I'm a taxidermist, and I was trying to come up with a way to give you bones the next time I seen you. And because the ribs on a deer are obviously not the same on the cow. They're too light. I gave a set to Max over there, Reverend Peyton, and we ended up working out something right before COVID hit. I had made a set for you when you were on tour with them, but you weren't at the Indianapolis show. It was just after Thanksgiving or something. So I ended up giving them to Max to get it figured out. But this time I got some made for you this year for this deer season.
Oh, wonderful.
But we're using the bones off the shin of a deer leg, and they actually sound really good. I gave one set to Max already, and he likes them.
Oh, that's great. Now I'm so glad to see that Max is picking up on those bones. I was watching one video of him just recently that just sounded fantastic, and it's the bones are such a interesting and unique instrument. I was at the Mount Airy Fiddlers Convention in North Carolina, which is up in the mountains. And if you've ever seen the Andy Griffith show, it's actually the town that the Andy Griffith show is based off of. So Andy Griffith made the show based off of his experiences growing up in Mount Airy. So it's kind of a funky little town in North Carolina. And I was there at the Fiddlers Convention, and there was a lady who who gave me a set of bones there, and she was a sort of an older lady who had actually, she was from Mars Hill, North Carolina, where Bascom Lamar Lunsford's from.
Oh, yeah.
And so she saw the way that I was playing the guitar, and she just walked up and said, "You've got to learn the bones. They're part of the tradition, and I think that you would sound great playing the bones." And so she just sat down with me right then and taught me how to play and gave me a set of bones. And that was how I started. I had played percussion in school. Like before I started playing guitar, I played percussion in the school band. So the idea of small percussion and being able to play multiple instruments is also something that's kind of guided me as well. That's why I tend to gravitate toward a lot of instruments. But it brought me back full circle when I started playing the bones, because all of a sudden I could bring all of those rudiments into just a single instrument that I could carry in my pocket. And that was so so empowering for me. Because also, as a percussionist, when it comes to old-timey music, you find moments where there's percussion on some of the old-time recordings, but it's not present all the time. And again, for good reason in some types of ways. I can't imagine a lot of 78s having bones on them because the bones are so loud. And with the type of technology they had in the past, I could see how the bones could get completely left out, because they would just completely bleed over all of the sound in a certain type of way. But I was able to find some early recordings of bones, but also I started to just take those rudiments and started to find where are the percussive elements that are within each of these old-timey numbers, because percussion is almost like harmony with singing, where you can have a melody and one person singing a melody and it sounds completely fine and complete. But when you pull that perfect harmony into certain songs, those harmony notes with the melody notes create something that's much bigger sounding and can be much more pleasing to the ear in many ways. And percussion is sort of the same way, where you can have a singular rhythm, whether it's a 4/4 rhythm, and then you can put you can do what jazz does, which is 3/2, which is like a 3 count over a 2 count, and you can create this really complex polyphonic rhythm with those sort of rudiments and those sort of rhythmic ideas. And so with the bones, I started experimenting with those ideas. I started trying to find the moments where the bones could create sort of a underpinning that at times could be like a snare drum, or at times they could be like the spoons or like a washboard. And then other times they could just be their own thing, playing like on Black Cowboys, or all of my records, I tend to usually have one Bones lead solo. And so whether it's like Marching Up Prospect Hill from the Prospect Hill album, I have Guy Davis playing the harmonica while I'm playing the Bones. Or on Black Cowboys, I have John Henry y los Vaqueros, where we have a double Bones with just a fiddle playing. And so being able to experiment with some of those ideas of old-timey percussion, that's it gave me just a whole new conduit in which I could express that. And yeah, the Bones have just been great wherever I've had a chance to go, and I've played Bones with I even played Bones on an album from Baseko Kuyate, the famous Malian griot. I got to play Bones with him. I've gotten to play Bones with oh gosh, who else? One time I got to play at a jam with a group called Los Planeros de 21, which is a Puerto Rican group, and it just kind of goes from there. And then of course the old timey music. A countless number of old timey groups I've had a chance to be able to play Bones with, and that's always fun. And especially Old Crow Medicine Show. That's always a great time whenever I've been able to get together with those guys too.
Everybody should check out Dom's tutorial on YouTube. My son is 15. He's been drumming for maybe 3 years, but I made him watch that about a year ago. It blew his mind. It's incredible.
Oh, wonderful. That's awesome. Yeah. And it's, and that's something as well as I got the Bones, it just, it became natural to want to teach and to share the Bones with other people. And especially when it comes to drummers, that's something that the Bones have there's such a power just in the way that, when you hold them between the hands and you get that snap, it's almost, I treat it like it's like a virtual drum, because you can just move your hand almost like you're hitting it with a stick, but you can get that click out of it. So it's kind of, you can get one set, but then you can get the clicks back here, and then you can get the clicks here and here. And it almost becomes like a 3-dimensional drum that can constantly be working. Of course, the skill in Bones playing is figuring out when not to play. And that's one of the big lessons over time. And then when I teach classes, I always tell people that. I always mention that rarely is there a gray area on Bones playing. You either want to not play Bones or you do want to play Bones, because when you bring the Bones in, there's such a distinctive sound, and many times there's not a lot of dynamics with the Bones. Even though you can play them softer or louder, it's one very distinctive sound, and you want to make sure that when that distinctive sound comes in, you're lifting the band up, because it'll go the other way if you're not.
That'd be me clicking and clacking and going crazy.
And I've seen it work both ways with it, but it really teaches one how to really assess a musical situation and be able to figure out where you can fit with if the band is complete without the Bones. When you add the Bones, what are you bringing? Like for example, certain blues jams, you can bring that little habanero rhythm within it. Like if or any number of rhythmic patterns that can accentuate the rhythm that's playing with whatever said music. I'd recommend one other video too, just to kind of show some Bones playing. Is I got to work with a great fiddler by the name of David Bragger, and we have a little video up there where I'm really getting a chance to elaborate a couple of different rhythms in the course of this fiddle tune, and that's always fun. It's also interesting with when I've had a chance to play music with some of the mid 19th century banjo music, particularly the early minstrel banjo. The music itself was built in such a way that the Bones can really elaborate and emphasize certain aspects of the rhythm that are part of the compositional quality of these particular banjo numbers specifically. And so, there are a lot of videos of me out playing in very different settings with the Bones. And so just to be able to articulate percussion in so many different facets, it's really, really wonderful. Or I got a great performance with Hot Club of Cowtown that I got to do at the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering a couple of years back. And so that's a little bit of, Western swing Bones. And so that's a different type of playing as well.
Nice. I'd like to get out to that one year. That always looks cool.
Oh, it's a big time. It's I mean, just an amazing event, and also just it really you really get to see the showcase of all the different uh, current contemporary cowboy music that might be out there. It's just it's really something. Uh, right before actually one of the last gigs I did before the pandemic was over at the 2020 Cowboy Poetry Gathering, and we got to do a big Black Cowboys themed gathering, and we brought in a whole bunch of different artisans, and there were a lot of cooks that were cooking some of the traditional food. And then also we got to even bring Lead Belly's white cowboy Stetson hat that he had
Oh,
for many
that's
years.
cool.
We got to contact the Lead Belly archives, and it actually blew up on Twitter. Everybody was going crazy over this beautiful white Stetson hat that he used to own.
Nice.
That's awesome. Well, like I said, I really appreciate you being on. I do want to ask you at least another question. I don't know about you, Garrett, but I got one more big one here. Is out of your career, which you've done a lot, what do you think you're most proud of? Out of everything you've accomplished, what's like the thing that you're just most proud of that you've been able to do?
Well, I have to say, oh boy, that's a tough one.
It's heavy. It's heavy.
I mean, Black Cowboys is the easy answer, just because it was definitely the most laborsome project that I've ever produced, just because it was so much information that had to be whittled down. So in one way, the easy answer would be Black Cowboys. But if I were to bring up something that I've done recently that I've been very proud of, I'll actually bring up two things. One was working with Tyler Childers on his wonderful album Long Violent History, and that was a very special session and a very special record, especially on LP. It just it really glistens off of the record, and I was able to experiment with a couple of different instruments as I was performing on that record, including using my giant 6-string banjo, Big Head Joe, and I was so glad that he got to play some of the opening notes on the Long Violent History record. So that's one I'm pretty proud of. Again, I was just a backup guy on that one, but I was able to put a little stamp on that record that I'm really proud of. I guess the other well, I mean, then there's the Shake Your Money Maker album single that I got to do with Rev Payton, and I mean, I got to get Rev Payton and Steve Cropper in the same room, and Big Damn Band and Scott Sutherland did a wonderful job bringing this beautiful little arrangement of Shake Your Money Maker together, and I was glad that I got to sing on top of that. You know, we did it at Sun Records Studio, so it was there was just some beautiful energy with that one. And then one other one, which was another kind of a big collaborative effort, was working on the Grand Ole Opry. And last year I got to do a performance with the Old Crow Medicine Show, Billy Strings and Molly Tuttle. And we did a version of Mama Don't Allow and Will the Circle Be Unbroken. And that was a powerful night. Standing on the Grand Ole Opry stage. And of course, during the pandemic, the Opry was not allowed to have an audience. And so we played this particular show with no audience. So when you get a chance to see this thing on YouTube, we're hitting it hard. And we had nobody there to see it, except for the people who were watching it on TV or hearing it over the radio. And I had this little sneaking idea that was in the back of my mind, and I mentioned it to the Opry folks that they should maybe try to put a record out of the show. At first, I thought maybe the Old Crow and Billy and Molly and me, we could get that show out there. But they actually took that idea and they did something a little better. They made a big highlight record called Opry Unbroken, which features the highlights of all of last year's performances. And our Mama Don't Allow is also on this record, and it's a beautiful, it's like a really beautiful record. It's one of my favorite. I find myself continuing to go back to it again and again. Great performances by Luke Combs and Marty Stewart and Vince Gill, and even Carrie Underwood. You know, and Brad Paisley. Just some really beautiful performances all around. And yeah, that was a particular highlight for me, because especially once I saw this record come in through the mail, it was it's special. It's real special. It's one of those highlights, especially in a time where the Opry wasn't sure if it was going to be able to continue on. And in the next couple of I think October 30th actually is going to be the 5,000th Grand Ole Opry radio broadcast. And so the fact that it was able to make it to 5,000 after such a pandemic and such a scary event, the fact that I was able to survive that record means a lot to me personally, just for that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I didn't know about that one. I'm definitely gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, they have it, I think, just at the Opry store. So you have to check it out there. It's not on the DSPs. They didn't want to put it out on the DSPs, but it's yeah, you're gonna find yourself listening to this one multiple times once you get a copy of it, because it's that good. I'm just gonna tell you that. I know it seems like I'm floating my own boat on this one, but all the performances on this thing are just solid. And it's and again, all of them are in front of no audience, so they're very clean, beautiful recordings as well as great performances. So that's a particular highlight for me, because I think they're coming up on their I think it's the 96th year this year, and I think they're coming up on their 100th in the next 3 or 4 years. So just to be able to have been a part of that is just it's a great highlight. It takes me back to thinking of my grandmother who came from a little town in Arkansas, telling me how much she loved Minnie Pearl and hearing her on the radio. And it takes me back to those early moments, and just to be able to stand on the Grand Ole Opry stage and to be able to say that I'm a part of that community is a real honor.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's great. Yeah. And violent history. That just caught me. Well, I think it caught everyone off guard, because there was no release date. Just bam, it was up, and you listen through it, and then you figure out the context behind it all. And it was just like, for me, that was album of the year for 2020 for sure, in my book. But one last thing I do want to say, I already talked to JD Wilkes. I would love to have you back on maybe in December or something like that, to do strictly a banjo session here, of just talking about the history of banjo music, different styles, all that good stuff. So I figured you and him would be great to have on at the same time, with your vast knowledge on the subject.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. Yeah. And JD and I, it's amazing now that I'm going to be 40 years old next year, but it's amazing to see how now at this point in time, like, I've known JD for so many years now. And just like with Rev, we've all been running around so long. It's amazing that we can all get together, and that we've got some dust on us. We've been around so long. And that would be wonderful to be able to sit and talk banjo with JD, because he's just such a wonderful player. And when we got to do that tour with Rev, it was really wonderful to be able to get together with everybody and just get to jam so hard on some of those songs. It was a great tour. Yeah, I love JD. He's a good dude.
Yes, he is. All right, man. Well, we'll be in touch, and like I said, thank you for being on.
Yeah,
Thank you, Dom.
Absolutely, Garrett, Jet. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, enjoy your evening. We'll catch you later.
All right, take care now.
Yeah.
Till next time.
All right.